Now, social media has become a part of our daily routines. It allows us to stay connected, access information, and in many ways, it's revolutionised how small businesses operate. But following the death of Love Island presenter Caroline Flack, the debate on online bullying and trolls has been reopened, with many people believing the toxic atmosphere on social media can have a devastating impact on people's mental health. So if social media were turned off tomorrow, would we be better or worse off? Well, let's discuss that issue now. Joining me from central London is blogger Em Clarkson, and here with me in the studio is author and host of a podcast called Food for Thought, Rhiannon Lambert. Welcome to both of you. Rhiannon, first of all, I want to get your take on social media. How useful is it to you, and do you generally see it as being a positive or a negative thing?
I think social media can be extremely positive and extremely negative. There are two big sides here to really take into account. As somebody that runs a business myself, I can see the way that it can enable you to reach people you'd never normally be able to reach. There are some wonderful things, people that couldn't afford to access certain types of information, see positive role models. However, there is an argument that, of course, anyone can contact you. You don't need to be verified. You can create a fake account and you can send a message to anybody. So a lot of people are hiding behind their keyboards, and that's not a nice thing at all.
Absolutely. And Em Clarkson, there's been a lot of talk about that darker side of social media. But what do you make of those positives that Rhiannon Lambert was talking about there? The ability to connect with people, and if you're running a business, for example, the ability to communicate with customers, and that resource for people to seek out information. Do you see social media as being positive?
In so many ways, social media is so incredibly positive. Like, I completely agree in that I have learned things that I never could have imagined that I'd even come across. I've met people that I've just become completely obsessed with, and in so many ways, my eyes have just been completely open to a whole new world. So I believe that social media has the potential for the positives to outweigh the negatives if it's used right. And I think we need to remember that we are in seriously infancy stages at the moment with something that's so new. Like, we all, we can kind of remember its inception. So it is incredibly positive, but there are so many kinks to be worked out. And I think obviously a light needs to be shone on the extraordinary negatives, in particularly with trolling, because that is something that is out of control. And we always thought, I think, that it was sort of just these random, small, anonymous people hiding behind their keyboards. But as is becoming more and more evident, this is normal people now using social media probably in the wrong way. So I think that's the consideration.
So yeah, Em Clarkson, tell us a little bit more about that. What can be done about it, for starters? I mean, how do you, once you've started this world, how do you shut down bits of it? How do you control it?
I think that's a really key question, because the question is social media, if it goes tomorrow, is the world better or worse? Social media isn't going anywhere. We're not going to wake up tomorrow, sadly or happily, with it gone. It's sticking around, and we need to work out a way that we can use it. As far as I'm concerned, I definitely think there need to be more rigorous checks. I think the thing that frightens me at the moment is someone can say something really awful pretty much offhand, I think for a lot of people, they just say it, blurt it out, and then it's in the ether, and there's kind of no repercussions for that, generally speaking. I mean, if some of the things that were said to me online were said to me on the street, I would have a pretty good case for street harassment, and I would be a victim of harassment. But when it happens online, it's sort of just brushed off as one of those things that we should have to deal with and not taken entirely seriously. So I think there should be considerably more weight attached to what we say, and more accountability for people that say it.
OK, well, Rhiannon Lambert, I don't know what your feeling is about this. Obviously, there are certain protections out there. There's also the issues of freedom of speech as well. But you talked about these anonymous people contacting, trolling, and contacting people in a very negative way and trolling them. Can something be done about that, do you think?
Well, this is the interesting thing. We actually had an episode on my podcast with somebody that works with Instagram and Facebook on policy change, and she was saying that they're working towards something, but at the moment it's very hard to, first of all, quantify, quite rightly, as we've said, any data and statistics on what the actual impact of harm is here. So we don't have anything to go off yet because social media is so new and we don't have statistics as to how many people it's affecting with their mental health. It's very hard to implement any type of policy change. But what I hope to see Instagram and Facebook do is definitely get some way of governing who is signing up so they can be held accountable to their actions. It's all very well reporting and blocking somebody, but what are the repercussions of that? We're waiting for policy.
Well, yes, and that's an issue, isn't it? That kind of verification. That's one thing that a lot of people have talked about in the last few days, that if people have to prove who they are before they sign up to any of these social media sites, Twitter included as well, they have to prove who they are. And then if they are out of order, there can be some kind of sanction directed in the right place.
I think that is critical, to be honest, because a lot of people do say what they say because they're hiding, and they pretty much know that they can get away with it. And I think as well on that kind of idea of like blocking stuff, the onus kind of ends up on the victim in a lot of instances at the moment. So if you are the victim of trolling, it's kind of on you to block that person or report that person rather than, just stopping them doing it in the first place. So I would hope that, people would be less inclined to say it if we could see a picture of them and know their name. And, the funny thing is these people aren't that hard to find. Often, like, when someone says something horrible to me, I can Google them and I can probably find out where they live or work or whatever. And the minute you tell them that, they very quickly change their tune and often backtrack. So I think it is kind of like the Anonymity Shield. And if social media platforms did do more to make people accountable for their words, then I would hope that we'd see less trolling in the long run.
Well, yes, and Rhiannon, that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Our Anonymity Shield. And David Baddiel has talked about this, hasn't he, in recent days? He said social media has weaponised, nuclearised the worst part of ourselves, our natural schadenfreude. I mean, is there a sense that people are now being allowed to vent what they've always thought? It's just they've got an outlet for it now.
Potentially so, and it is quite disturbing. But as we've said, we can't imagine a life without it, and it does have so many positives. It's how we use it, and it's regulating and being aware of our psychology and our mental health, how we cope.
Well, yes, and let's focus a bit more on those positives then, shall we? So Em Clarkson, so many businesses now can't imagine running their businesses now without social media. Clearly, businesses ran perfectly well before it was invented, but it does add whole new layers of communication, doesn't it?
It does, and there is huge potential for so many companies and so many people to do things that we never would have dreamed of. And in so many ways, it is so positive. Social media, does get a really, really hard rep, and bad rep even, and it's given a really hard time when it's probably, in the long run, maybe the good will outweigh the bad, and we just don't sing the praises of the good enough, if that makes sense. But I think for small businesses, for creatives, for writers, photographers, singers, they can get their work out there in a way that they never have before, and that's incredible. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, it's beyond anything imaginable. It's amazing, and when used right, it's a great power. It's a superpower. It's just being misused at the moment.
Well, yes, and Rhiannon, you talked about role models earlier. Obviously, we've been focusing a lot on the people in the public eye who are attracting a lot of criticism, but you feel that there are positives as well for having public figures out there in this more accessible way.
Oh, completely. People you would never have heard of until they had a TV show or a feature in a magazine. They wouldn't be able to voice who they are as a person and what they believe. They're able to do extra campaigns, extra charity work on the side. There's lots of different movements out there for different ethnicities, cultures, backgrounds, body shapes, sizes. And as a health professional myself online, it's also wonderful that people feel that they're not alone. And that's the most important thing. You can relate a little bit more to everyone else's daily struggles.
And Em Clarkson, ultimately, we might appeal to different social media companies to put in more controls, but does it really, at the end of the day, come down to us as individuals behaving responsibly, behaving kindly? That phrase, be kind, has been used a lot in the last few days. Does it require all of us just to be good citizens? Is there not much else we can do about it?
I think ultimately that is what it's going to come down to. And for the last few years, like, we've been having this debate kind of around and about the same thing, asking what can be done to make more positive changes, whether it's reality TV, maybe it's influencer culture, maybe it's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of these things. But ultimately, the fact is at the end of the day, the problem is the users. It's being misused, and we are the people that are using it, and we're using it wrong. And perhaps we can be forgiven for that because we are at such an early stage of it, and we weren't given a guidebook or a handbook. And perhaps, you know, sort of basic manners should dictate how we behave. But I think people have just got a bit carried away. And I think once you do something one time and get away with it, it's sort of snowballs a little bit for a lot of people. And often, and Billie Eilish announced this morning that she was coming off Instagram because of the abuse that she's been receiving, which I think is bonkers because she's 18 and this is her world, if you like, and she's kind of been chased out of it. And I think that is something that just says to me, it's people just trying to be funny, and they're trying to be outrageous, and they're trying to say things to shock, and actually they're forgetting that they're talking to real people. And so ultimately, yeah, it does. I think it falls on us to behave better at the end of the day.
OK, well, it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not we do manage to tame this creature that is social media over the years ahead, but really interesting to discuss it both with you, Clarkson, and Rhiannon Lambert. Thanks to you for coming in as well. Now, the issue of diversity